Arthropleura was not a bug. It was a hallway with legs. 8.5 feet of armored, segmented animal, almost 2 feet wide, weighing about as much as a grown man, scuttling across the floor of a forest that doesn't exist anymore. If you walked into a Carboniferous swamp 326 million years ago and one of these passed you, the closest thing your brain could compare it to would be a kayak. A kayak with around 64 legs, moving faster than something that size has any right to move. This is the story of the largest land arthropod that ever lived, the biggest bug, by any honest definition of the word, in the history of the planet. And the strangest part is not its size. The strangest part is what we learned about it in October of 2024, when paleontologists in France finally found its head. Because for 170 years, we got this animal completely wrong. Let's start with the body, because the body is the part that haunts people. The genus is called Arthropleura, pronounced Arthropleura, and the name comes from Greek words meaning jointed rib. That tells you almost nothing useful, which is appropriate, because for most of the time we've known about this creature, we've had almost nothing useful to go on. Just fragments, sections of armored exoskeleton the size of dinner plates scattered through Carboniferous rock in Europe and North America. The first fossil was named in 1854 by German researchers working in coal-bearing Carboniferous rock. After that, for over a century and a half, the picture filled in slowly, one broken piece at a time. Researchers would find a chunk of carapace here, a set of tracks there, a partial spine somewhere else. They knew it was big. They knew it was old. They knew it was related somehow to the millipedes and centipedes you can still find under wet leaves in your backyard. What they didn't know was the size. Not really. The estimates kept getting upgraded decade after decade as bigger and bigger pieces came out of the rock, and there is a complication that made the size question even harder. Most of what we have from Arthropleura is not the animal. It's the animal's used clothing. Like every arthropod, Arthropleura grew by molting. It would crack its armor along a seam, crawl out, and harden a new and slightly larger exoskeleton over the soft body underneath. The shed casings, the empty husks, are what tend to fossilize. They preserve more readily than the soft bodies do because they're already made of tough mineralized chitin. So when paleontologists pulled fragments out of Carboniferous rock, they were often pulling out an empty suit that the actual animal had walked away from. Each molt was bigger than the last. Some of the biggest Arthropleura fragments in museum collections may not even represent the biggest individuals. They might represent average adults that happen to leave behind one good molt before continuing to grow. This is part of why estimates of maximum size keep climbing. Every few decades, somebody finds a slightly larger shed casing, and the ceiling moves up again. Then, in January 2018, a group of scientists from Cambridge took what they were calling a social trip up to the coast of Northumberland in northern England. It was the kind of trip where geologists go to a beach the way most people go to a bar. They were walking along the shore at Howick Bay near sunset when one of them noticed something. A sandstone boulder had recently fallen from the cliff above, and it had cracked open on the way down. Inside the crack was a fossil so large that for a second they assumed it was a log. It wasn't a log. It was a single molted section of Arthropleura's exoskeleton. Just a section. The piece was 2.5 feet long and almost 2 feet wide. When the team scaled up from that fragment to the size of the full animal, the number that came back was 8.6 feet long, around 110 pounds. They had to call in more people just to carry the boulder off the beach. 4 paleontologists to lift one piece of one bug. Now hold that number in your head. 8.5 feet. That's roughly the length of a 1996 Ford F-150's bed plus the cab. That's longer than the average American couch. That's longer than an adult female American alligator, and the boulder team's estimate is on the conservative end. Some Carboniferous tracks attributed to Arthropleura are 20 inches wide. The animal that left those tracks may have pushed past 10 feet. Picture standing in your kitchen. The biggest known Arthropleura would not have fit. Its head would be coming out of the doorway while its tail was still in the hall. So, we know how big it was. We know how heavy it was. We know where it lived. The question that took 170 years to answer was, what was it actually doing? For most of paleontology's history, the answer was something like, well, given the size of this thing and the size of its mouth parts, and the fact that some of its closest living relatives are centipedes, this was probably a predator, maybe a horrifying one. There were illustrations from the early 1900s showing Arthropleura towering over small amphibians, jaws clamped down, looking like an industrial accident with legs. Documentary reconstructions in the 2000s leaned even harder into it. The narrator's voice would drop, and you'd see a slow-motion CGI Arthropleura chase down something the size of a beagle, and the music would do exactly what you'd expect. That was the consensus. For a long time, that was the answer, and the answer was wrong. The reason it stayed wrong for so long is depressingly simple. In all those years, in all those quarries and coal seams and sandstone cliffs, nobody had ever found an Arthropleura head. Not one. The body fossils were everywhere. The skull, the part that would actually tell you what this animal was eating and how, was completely missing from the record. And without a head, you cannot say what something hunts. You can only guess. That changed in October 2024 in a place called Montceau-les-Mines in eastern France. Paleontologists working there examined a collection of small siderite nodules, stones that had been sitting in a regional museum in autumn for years. Most of them were unremarkable. Two were not. Inside those two nodules, perfectly preserved, were the complete bodies, including the heads, of juvenile Arthropleura. The fossils were small, just 1.5 inches long. These were babies, but they were intact. They had everything the adult fossils were missing. The team, led by a paleontologist named Michael Leritier, ran CT scans through the nodules and reconstructed the head in 3 dimensions. What they found rewrote the species. Arthropleura did not have a predator's mouth. It had 2 pairs of feeding appendages, the first short and rounded, the second longer and almost leg-like, fixed beneath a roughly circular head with slender antennae and stalked eyes. The whole arrangement was wrong for hunting. The jaw geometry, the muscle attachment points, the way the mouth parts came together, all of it pointed at a different job. This was not a mouth designed for tearing through flesh. It was a mouth designed for chewing through fallen plant matter. Arthropleura was a detritivore, an eater of rot, a vegetarian, if you want the cleanest English word for it, though even that is too active. It was a creature whose entire job was to crawl through warm, wet, decaying forest floor and process whatever the dying ferns and lycopsids left behind. Leritier himself, when describing the find, called it the cow of the Carboniferous. The cow of the Carboniferous. Now stay with me, because this is where the horror of this animal actually clicks into place. Because being told that an 8.5-foot armored monstrosity ate plants does not make it less terrifying. It makes it more terrifying, and the reason is in everything else that was alive in the same swamp at the same time. You have to understand what the Carboniferous period was. This was a stretch of Earth's history that ran from about 359 million years ago to 299 million years ago. The dinosaurs hadn't shown up yet. They wouldn't show up for another 60 million years, give or take. Mammals wouldn't get serious until 100 million years after that. The Carboniferous belonged to plants, and to the things that ate them, and to the things that ate those things. And the air in the Carboniferous was different, not in a subtle way, in a way that physically changed what was possible for living tissue. Today, the air you're breathing is about 21% oxygen. During the late Carboniferous, atmospheric oxygen has been estimated as high as 35%. That is not a small jump. That is the difference between sea level and an oxygen tent. And for one specific group of animals, for arthropods, for the things that breathe by letting air diffuse passively through tiny holes in their armor, that difference was everything. An arthropod's size is limited by how far oxygen can travel into its body before it runs out. Bigger body, longer trip. In modern air, the math caps out somewhere around a giant weta or an atlas moth. In Carboniferous air, the math changed. Oxygen could push deeper into bigger tissue. The ceiling moved. Bugs went up to meet it. That is why, when you walked through a Carboniferous forest, the things crawling and flying around you would have been wrong on a fundamental level. Above you, dragonfly relatives called griffinflies, including a creature named Meganeura, were patrolling the air. Their wingspans hit 2.5 feet across. Their bodies were thicker than a hot dog. On the ground next to you, scorpions of the genus Pulmonoscorpios grew over 2 feet long, with stingers built to a scale that no living scorpion can match. Cockroaches the size of small house cats. Mayflies the size of canaries. This was Arthropleura's neighborhood. It was the biggest thing in the neighborhood, and it lived in this neighborhood for over 50 million years. And the most telling thing about that neighborhood is what we don't find in the fossil record. We do not have a single confirmed predator of adult Arthropleura. Not one bite mark, not one stomach content, not one fossilized scene of an Arthropleura being eaten by something larger. The biggest land predators of the Carboniferous were amphibians, and they were not small. Eriops was a crocodile-shaped killer in the neighborhood of 6 feet long, with a head built for clamping down on whatever it could fit into its mouth. There were others in the same size range, hunting the same swamps. These animals were the closest thing the Carboniferous had to a wolf or a leopard, and they appear to have left Arthropleura alone. Think about that. An 8.5-foot low-slung, armored vegetarian walking through the same swamps as 6-foot apex predators was apparently not worth the trouble. The shell was too thick, the legs were too many, the body was too long to flip. Whatever the reason, the math came out against the amphibians, and Arthropleura got to spend its adult life doing nothing but eating rot and getting bigger. Now circle back to the cow comparison. The terror of Arthropleura is not the terror of being chased. It is the terror of scale. You are walking through a humid, dim, hot forest. The trees over your head are not trees you would recognize. They are called lepidodendron. They look like green telephone poles covered in diamond-patterned scales, with sprays of fronds at the top. The ground under your feet is half soil, half black, rotting plant matter. The air is so thick with moisture and pollen that it sits on your skin. Every surface is wet. Every shadow is moving. You hear it before you see it. The legs. 60 or so jointed legs, hitting wet leaf litter in a fast rolling rhythm. The sound of someone slowly running a stick down a flight of stairs. Only the stick is alive, and the stairs are the entire forest floor. You turn, and the front of an animal almost 3 feet wide is coming around a fallen lepidodendron trunk. The head is small for the body, rounded, with antennae sweeping ahead of it. The eyes are on stalks. The body behind the head is 30 armored segments long, each segment carrying its own pair of legs, and the whole thing keeps coming and coming and coming like a freight train made of insect, and it walks right past you. It is not interested. You are not on the menu. You are not, by any of the categories its brain understands, food. But that is the part that should keep you up at night. Because Arthropleura did not need to hunt to be a problem for any animal that crossed its path. An animal that weighs 110 pounds and stretches the length of a small sedan does not have to be hostile to be dangerous. It just has to be in your way. If it stepped on a small amphibian, the amphibian was finished. If it shoved through a burrow, the burrow collapsed. If it decided a particular patch of rotting log was its rotting log, every other invertebrate in the area had to find a different lunch. The cow of the Carboniferous wasn't a killer. It was a force of nature, and in a swamp where the air made giants and the ground was already crowded with 2-foot scorpions and dog-sized roaches, the largest of the giants got to do whatever it wanted. There's one more piece of the 2024 puzzle that's worth sitting with. The juvenile Arthropleura fossils, the ones with the intact heads, had eye stalks, stalked eyes, like a crab. Modern millipedes don't have those, modern centipedes don't have those, but marine arthropods do. What that suggests, and the researchers were careful about how they said it, is that baby Arthropleura might have lived in the water. Their adult relatives almost certainly walked on land, but the young might have started life in shallow Carboniferous pools, breathing through structures that worked underwater before crawling out to begin a much larger life on the forest floor. If that holds up under more fossil evidence, it would mean Arthropleura had a life cycle the size of a horror film, hatch in a swampy pool alongside something the length of your finger, crawl out as an adolescent, spend the next phase of your life growing and growing and growing, adding body segments through each molt until at some point past sexual maturity, you stop growing. By then, you are 110 pounds of slow-moving forest engine, and there is almost nothing in your world that can hurt you. Even the giant amphibians of the Carboniferous, predators like Eriops with skulls full of teeth, would have looked at an adult Arthropleura and made the obvious decision, which is to chew on literally anything else. So how did the largest bug that ever lived end up in a museum drawer instead of in your backyard? The same way the Carboniferous itself ended. The world that built Arthropleura started to break. Around 305 million years ago, the great coal forests of the late Carboniferous began to collapse. The continents were drifting into a new configuration. The climate shifted towards something drier. The lush, oxygen-pumping swamps that had covered enormous stretches of what is now Europe and North America started to fragment and then to die back and then to disappear. Once the swamps were gone, the plant matter that fed them stopped piling up, and oxygen levels in the atmosphere began their long slide back towards something closer to modern air. The ceiling that had let giant arthropods exist started lowering. The math reversed. Arthropleura held on for a while. Some of the last specimens come from the early Permian, around 290 million years ago, in deposits that record an ecosystem already in decline. After that, nothing. The body fossils stop showing up. The 20-inch-wide tracks vanish from the sandstone. The largest land invertebrate the planet has ever produced just walks out of the fossil record and is gone. No asteroid, no volcanic event, no single bad afternoon, just a slow climate shift, an oxygen drop, and a forest type that stopped existing. The cow of the Carboniferous outlived its pasture. And here is where you should think about the implications, because Arthropleura is not just a curiosity. Its existence and disappearance is one of the clearest demonstrations on the entire fossil record that the planet sets the rules and the animals follow them. Arthropleura was not too aggressive. It was not outcompeted. It did not lose a war to a smarter rival. It was built for one specific atmosphere, one specific kind of forest, one specific level of oxygen pressure. And when those things changed, the design stopped working. There is no second chapter. There is no descendant lineage walking around today at 50 pounds, or 20 pounds, or 5 pounds. The line just ends. Modern millipedes, the kind you might find under a flower pot in your garage, are technically distant cousins of Arthropleura. The biggest of them is the African giant millipede, which can reach about 15 inches long and weigh a fraction of a pound. The shape is similar, the architecture is recognizable, but the scale has come down by roughly a factor of 7, and the weight by something closer to a factor of 300. Whatever made Arthropleura possible is not in the air anymore. It hasn't been in the air for almost 300 million years. We have exactly 3 high-quality Arthropleura body fossils in the entire scientific record. One is the 2018 Northumberland find. 2 are the 2024 juveniles from France, the ones that finally gave us the head. There are also footprints, trackways, in places like Joggins, Nova Scotia, and on the coast of the Scottish island of Arran. You can walk those beaches today. The marks are still in the rock. They are some of the only things that prove, beyond any argument, that an animal this size walked on this planet. The Joggins site on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia is one of the most important Carboniferous fossil sites in North America. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and the cliffs there preserve a slice of the late Carboniferous in unusual detail. If you drive up from the American Northeast and stand on that beach at low tide, you can put your hand inside the actual footprint of an Arthropleura. The track is up to 20 inches wide. It runs across slabs of mudstone that 318 million years ago were the floor of a tropical swamp. The thing that made those marks was walking on what is now Canada, because the continent it was on did not exist yet. The land that became Nova Scotia was sitting near the equator, attached to what would eventually become Northern Europe, and Arthropleura was simply going about its day. You will not find a more direct, more physical connection to a vanished animal anywhere else in the fossil record. The bones of T-Rex have to be dug up and assembled. The footprints of Arthropleura are sitting in the open air, getting washed by the highest tides on Earth twice a day, and they have been doing that for hundreds of millions of years. That's it. That is the whole physical record of a creature that ruled the swamps for over 50 million years. A few pieces of armor, 2 juvenile bodies the length of a credit card, and a set of footprints longer than your forearm. So the next time someone tells you that bugs are small, that arthropods have a hard ceiling, that life on land can only go so far before physics steps in, remember that the physics has changed before. The world built Arthropleura. The world unbuilt it. And the air you are breathing right now is the residue of the slow collapse that ended the age of giant bugs. There are still places in the Northumberland coast where the cliffs are eroding, dropping new boulders to the beach every winter. Researchers have already said it openly. Somewhere in that rock there is almost certainly a complete adult Arthropleura waiting to come out. A full one. Head, body, all 64 legs. The biggest known bug in one piece for the first time in human history. We just haven't gotten to it yet. When it comes out, when somebody finally walks down to a wet British beach on a grey afternoon and sees the full silhouette of an 8.5-foot armoured animal pressed into the stone, we will finally know what it actually looked like. Until then, we have a head from France, a body section from England, and a set of footprints walking out of a vanished forest into nothing. The cow of the Carboniferous is still down there. The rock just hasn't given it up yet. And that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.